So, welcome back to the second part of talk about Oppenheimer film, a full analysis and interpretation or clarification of the themes, symbols, and psychological and social political meanings of the film. At times, a bit mystical perspective, as Nolan is also that. And so I recommend before watching this, watching the first part, however long, around 40 minutes. But if you want to grasp a really good understanding of the film, so I recommend beginning with part one, continuing this part, and probably and hopefully there will be a third part and maybe even a fourth one. And again, forgive me for English not being my native language, but I think it's good enough. And I'm Rafael Daniel, or Daniel. I'm a cinema critic, and let's continue from where we stopped last time. So, I want to start with a note about Nolan's script and screenwriting. So this script, like many of Nolan's scripts, or Nolan and his brother, is at times, or some of the films, is kind of multi-dimensional and paradoxical, or at least it pretends to be that. And there's a question here, which is, who is the movie really about? And I think that this thing is a kind of a game or a play around that, which is deeply intentional by Nolan, because as far as it concerns, Strauss is concerned, of course, Strauss is just a fictional figure. It doesn't really exist in reality. It exists in the script. He exists in Nolan's mind, and eventually he exists in our minds, because the real Strauss had died many years ago. So, but as an image of Strauss that we recreate in our mind while watching the film. So as far as Strauss is concerned, and in the first part of the film, in the first hearing, Strauss is the head, as we've said, of the Atomic Energy Nuclear Energy Committee. In the second one, I'm not sure whether he was already the Minister of Commerce and Industry, or he was a candidate, and the hearing was aiming to see if he's really legally fitting the role, following what he did to Oppenheimer in the first committee, first hearing that he arranged for Oppenheimer around 1954, if I'm not wrong or mistaken. And so we kind of identify with Strauss in many moments in the film, especially when we see him in the first scenes, when he introduces Princeton to Oppenheimer, and there's kind of something of Groves. Matt Damon, Strauss is the one that is Downey Jr. is playing. Kind of father figure, something nice, something moderate, something warm, like looks a bit like a wholehearted person, which we discover there might be this part in him, but it's not only that. And we already talked and especially in the last part of the first talk, about the fragmentation that is a part of humanity. There's a theme that Nolan deals with and warns us about time and again, film after film, and something which is a part of the character of Oppenheimer, this duality, and and um, and and we kind of build for ourselves, maybe unconsciously, a reliable image of Strauss, and so going back to what I've started saying about the fictional character Strauss, the way that he sees things. So as far as he's concerned, the story or the film, yeah, so to speak, is about himself. This is really important, I think, and so the film kind of paints Strauss's own hearing as a sort of frame for or periphery or shell for the plot, and for the film in a way, also maybe visually, and but at some in some moments, especially towards the end of the film, I think the last third or something like this, where you have really long legal discussions, and black and white, and you ask yourself, is this a Nolan film, or this is not Interstellar? This is not just a philosophical film. This is really Law and Order, but really long, and it's like sitting in court and hearing like lawyers and you know, and the judges and Strauss talking for such a long time about all these legal and political and psychological details, but and Nolan wants the film to be that also. He wants I think first he wants this film to he wants like this film is a red alarm for scientists, for also for lawmakers, for industry people, for tycoons, for people with high roles in the academy, for governmental figures. I think and for kind of maybe also diplomats or people who have a lot of power as attorneys. He wants to talk to these people and say to them in their language, which is kind of many times highly professional, especially for such a popular film. And Nolan is who's more popular than Nolan. He wants to say to them, listen, the house is on fire. Look at what is happening in the world. Look at Trump, and look at what happens in Brazil, and in the Brexit, and the climate crisis, and everything that is happening around COVID, and the really dangerous struggle getting more and more inflamed between US and China, and between China and India, and all the technological advance that we have now, and the AI machines, which Nolan was saying recently regarding the Oppenheimer film, that he thinks that this is really dangerous, and this is another kind of atom bomb another thing might create, get out of control, and who knows if we can really protect ourselves good enough or effectively after creating maybe a real powerful AI system, which we still haven't, but we're on the way to this. We already have the deep fake machines, which are, so it's amazing to see that. And I think that Nolan speaks about these things, and he's concerned, and he's concerned because he's a moral person, and he always says that he cares so much about humanity, and I believe him, and that he believes so much in humanity, and I believe him, but he's also really worried, and I think that not for nothing. And so, coming back to what I said about the long Strauss hearing discussions, at some point in the film, suddenly it looks like that the main figure in the film is Strauss and not Oppenheimer or somebody else, because it's Strauss again and again and again, and his story and the way that he was insulted and what happened with all these scientists regarding, with him, and we kind of understand that he has the protagonist complex, psychological complex, and the IMAX is really like, so to speak, moving with that, like giving Strauss a vast cinematic room to express his agony, his insults, his perspectives, and we also see that he's talking bullshit, but that he's really hurt, and this is really important because this bullshit in minds of people, and not judging it for a moment, and this hurtedness, is in English, being hurt, which moves a lot of the imaginary narratives that we have in our mind. Think about Lenny in Memento. If you've watched Memento, probably you did. If you haven't watched Memento, watch it twice or 3 times, please. It's really typical. And if it wasn't typical and also destructive in a common and typical way, Nolan wasn't dealing with this, as far as I understand Nolan, because Nolan is really, his films are very lofty and kind of supreme and melodramatic and bombastic and complex and philosophical, but he's a really practical person in terms of messages, although sometimes it's hard to understand them, and he's as a person, he's down to earth, and he knows what he wants to say, and what he wants to do mostly is to help us live healthy life. I mean, I don't know Nolan personally, of course, but this is how I understand him, mostly by his films and occasionally following, listening or watching interviews. Although he doesn't say much in his interviews, I think, but maybe I'm not knowledgeable enough regarding with this. And so, how much time? Maybe this one will be half an hour or 40 minutes as well, this video. And so, we're continuing talking about the fragmented and selfish or self-centered nature, or maybe it's not nature, but a kind of common disorder of the human mind. And when the human mind is competitive, which is competition, ill competition is again a part of what's in the film's heart or core. And I say in the last video, when I say this is in the core of the film, and I say that this is about many things, that all these things about which I say this is in the core of this film, look at them carefully. They're all really highly connected, or maybe make actually one thing with maybe different facets, but it's one thing as far as I understand it. And the competitive and hurt human mind is also highly emotional, reactive, sometimes in very dark ways, and compulsive, and hence cognitively loose, because when emotions lead the system, or inflamed emotions, like being deeply insulted, like what happened to Strauss after after introducing Oppenheimer to Einstein in Princeton, and then Einstein not talking to Strauss anymore, or the joke that Oppenheimer makes in the committee regarding selling to Scandinavia, whatever they want to sell them, the kind of joke that he makes out of what Strauss is saying. This we understand are things that Strauss is really keeping, is not letting it go. For years he'll suffer and feel inferior, and when you feel like that, you'll be at times cognitively loose and disordered and biased in your way of interpreting the structure and nature of reality, even if you can still very analytically and coldly and effectively plan political schemes or revenges, or tactically you can be very sharp, but strategically you're losing it. And our world is like that too many times, and I think Nolan wants to say to us, and we don't understand it. And this is moving a lot of conflict and a lot of dangerous stuff that is going on in our world for thousands of years, and especially in the last 120 years, because we have so much lethal weapon and so many people who can use it and suffer because of it. And so Strauss is angry, and he has a false image of himself as the center of the world, and he has a kind of far-fetched, contradictory image of the entire scientific community. He sees the entire scientific community in a way as his personal tyrannical enemy, and he's kind of the nation, one of the nation protectors, like the defense figure, like the male defense figure, who's responsible for protecting America, and at some point Strauss's lawyer, like us, will understand that Strauss is trapped in his egoic protagonist complex. And this is very similar to what happened to other Nolan characters. And I mentioned Lenny in Memento, and I can mention also Robert in the film Prestige, Cobb in the film Inception, and mirth in Interstellar. It's not exactly, you know, the same as Strauss, but it's highly related. It's highly related, and 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 we see that Strauss feels that he always, however, you know, ascending and getting to, you know, the high windows and offices that he got to in his life, a successful man, a self-made man, as he calls them, himself, and Oppenheimer emphasizes, because he says in the beginning of the film, or relatively in the beginning, because Oppenheimer says, I can relate to that, and Strauss says, really? And Oppenheimer says, yeah, because my father was one. And then Oppenheimer keeps walking, and it's kind of insultive, because Oppenheimer, as we've said in the last video, he has his own, you know, hubris problem. Like he's kind of arrogant, and he likes being like that many times, although he has the other side as well, but it fucks him up, and he doesn't understand him too many times. And not only his relationships with Strauss, with his wife, or whoever, the community, fucks up the world. it's producing an atom bomb. Okay, we'll talk about this later, about the relationship between these two things. So Strauss feels that, or thinks, in a way, that he's still just this shoe seller that he says that he was as a young man. And he's not a physicist. He's not inside the great secrets of our universe, mystical secrets, scientific secrets. And maybe he could have been. They talk about it, something like that, but he chose another path, or maybe he just didn't have enough background for being this, although having maybe the natural capacity, and maybe he wanted to be something like that. So he feels that he doesn't understand all these things that Einstein, Oppenheimer understand, and that he's maybe someone who's on the side of things, like a secondary figure of America or the Second World War, you know, and so a bureaucrat, you know, and for me there is nothing wrong with that. I don't judge Strauss for being what he is, but and I don't judge truck drivers for being what they are, because we need truck drivers, and being a truck driver is, in my perception, is as good as being Einstein. But Strauss doesn't believe this on himself, but he thinks that other people point at him and say that about him. This is the problem, and this is very typical, talking about human beings. And really, this image that he has regarding with himself is not unrelated to Oppenheimer's public statements about Strauss. I've mentioned geostrategic ideas in the Atomic Nuclear Energy Committee, when they talk about selling these substances. I don't remember the exact name now, to Scandinavia and so on. And Oppenheimer, he is responsible, so he wants kind of to curb Strauss's aggressive security approach, because he feels it might be dangerous. But as Teller is dangerous, as Truman was a dangerous person, as we can see in the film. But the way he does it causes everyone in the hall to burst out laughing, and Strauss is really cringing, like contracting, and we see him insecure. And this is a really bad thing that Oppenheimer is doing to Strauss. And this is a really bad things that human beings do to other human beings. And this is moving a lot of self-defense, crazy self-defense, psychological, and eventually militaristic, and so and economical, and so on and so forth. And I think this is really important for Nolan to show us this is a real problem of our world, and it's a chain reaction, right? We talk about the atomic chain reaction, and there's also an emotional and social chain reaction when one person, as Albert Camus, the Algerian French philosopher, has said, myth of Sisyphus, in society tends to everyone like is putting down somebody else to feel inferior and feel more superior from himself, and then the last guy who's under everyone, he's doing it to his dog. And there's a kind of a joke. This doesn't really mechanically work this way, but in a way, society is like that. And this is kind of a chain reaction, also emotional and social, which is leading to a lot of what we see in the Oppenheimer film. Destruction in personal relationships and inside nations and internationally. And I'll give more examples from the film concrete later on, which are very like clear. This is really what Nolan is talking about in the film. Okay. So we're 27 minutes. Oppenheimer believes, and this is an opposition to most of the administration, that going back to other parts of the film, that the fascists are more dangerous. He foresees that than, I mean, maybe he was wrong, but as he sees that, or maybe we can debate, then the communists. And what we saw in the Second World War, really, that the communists were allies of the Americans and the British. And only after the war, we had the Cold War, but the Hitler was doing like more extreme things. Oppenheimer was proceeding than what Stalin was doing at that time that he says that before World War II. And he says with kind of sort of anxiety, he foresees what will happen to the Jews in Germany, which happened, but we see again and again in the film, Nolan shows us that the Nazi problem, the communist problem anyway, and the capitalist liberal democratic problem is actually the same problem. It's the same human problem. And I want to say Strauss can easily see Oppenheimer's faults and flaws, but not his own. And generally, I think we know that, or maybe we don't know, but many of us know, that it's much easier to see another person's crazy narratives and imaginary stories, or self-centeredness, or strange behaviors, or disordered behaviors, than to see it in us, because we see another person more objectively from afar, from aside, and it's harder to see ourselves also visually like that. and and for myself, it's kind of easy for me to kind of drown or lose myself inside the swamp of my beliefs and desires and impulses and hurts and wounds and emotional wounds and conditionings. And it's easier to see, when I don't need to live another person's life, it's easier to see it on another person. So Strauss says, and other people in the film, kind of objective and correct comments about Oppenheimer, but they don't see that they are the same, or maybe even worse. And so to see myself, I need a mirror. And this art of cinema was always talking about a mirror. And also Tarkovsky, which is a big influence for Nolan, he has a film called Mirror, and he talks about all his faults and flaws and fucks as a person in his film, although it's not a documentary, it's a feature, and he's reflecting it in a very sincere way, and he calls it Mirror. And another thing which is connected to that, talking about life force, life energy. Life force is necessary. Okay, what's life without vitality? Okay, but in animals, which are mechanically conditioned completely and instinctive, it can appear also as prey, the predator. And the predator can't be a non-predator, unless we humans we do all sorts of manipulations of this animal. But just naturally, the predator is a predator. He's conditioned biologically, neurologically, to be that. And I think personally, you don't need to agree with me, but for me, not being naive is to also admit that prey and the predator element is kind of deeply rooted in the human being also. But humans are not only animals. They're also animals, but they're not only animals, or maybe we're highly, highly, highly developed animals. And this means that we can we can really reflect ourselves, and we can ascend or transcend ourselves above the predator element and the kind of survival functions of our brain, because our survival mechanisms are really important. But in the world that we created to ourselves, we don't need these mechanisms to be so on and inflamed as they are, but they still are like that. The way that many people in Western society are so worried, so concerned about sex, so competition. This is not our frontal cortex. Our frontal cortex is emphasizing that it proliferates into some demonic size, but it's kind of a simpler thing, which is part of they say the reptile element, or the more primitive parts of our brain, and we see that however intelligent and intellectual and scientific we are, if we're moved by these instincts, it's not helping us anymore in this nowadays world to survive. it's causing wars and the creation of weapons or emissions and that might actually destroy us and destroy mankind, not help it, preserve itself, which is this is the aim, or one of the aims, not maybe only the aim, the only aim of, or one of the main aims of our survival mechanisms, and 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 we are also ethical and spiritual being, maybe not de facto, but in power we're like that. And I think it's really important for Nolan to open our hearts and help us, be more that heart and spirit, and less, this struggling animal thing, competitive, sexually inflamed, economically inflamed, Neputanic or Neputic, and so on, national in the kind of fishy way, violent, but we need reflection or mirror, as I said, and Nolan's film, this film Oppenheimer, like other Nolan films, is such a mirror. So there's something in Oppenheimer's choices, and we get some hints about that. Oppenheimer is a responsible person and a caring person, but he might be also a person, and this is a fragmentary. He desires destruction in a way, to destroy worlds, maybe. And here I made myself, I'm Israeli, so I made myself some notes which are not relevant to you about some crazy stuff that is going here with extreme religious Zionists or Jewish people and those from the Muslim side, it was a common idea in the around First World War and in the years following that the world needs to be kind of in a state of destruction in order to prepare the world to help it grow into some sort of social progressive redemption. And many communists believed in that. And I think we can see some people around Oppenheimer kind of playing with this idea. And Oppenheimer is sober enough; he's not that extreme, and he has some socialist ideas and he kinds of the borderline with communism. But he sees the danger in communism and the idealism and the way that idealism can lead easily maybe to brutal things, and he's not joining the Communist Party. But as a very young person, we see this power of killing in him, and explicitly it has a connection to him being hurt or feeling that he's an outsider, or feeling things similar to what Strauss is feeling. And Jean, his first lover in the film, she is less understanding. She's less careful regarding these things that I'm talking about, and so I'll come back to her in a moment. I want to say another thing about Oppenheimer, who is not as an adult, he's not an extreme person, or not as in socialism, not in his infidelities, or how this is the right word, and even not in his monogamy. It's kind of, there's something in this person which is kind of free and flexible and also kind and nice, and and um, and also he has, he knows that he's a problematic person in many ways. He's kind of open with many people regarding his flaws, and he's in love with many of his virtues, but not as much as, you know real narcissists. And 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 also the later tendency to use the atomic bomb, and the militaristic tendency, he's careful with that, and as we see, has careful arguments, tries to sell all through the years to the American administration, or to the White House. And um, 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 the he's sitting in the hearing, dealing with his security classification. They call him the communist. Nowadays, we'll say a leftist, and they don't give him a way out of this, and um, he's in his discourse with, what is the name of the Rob, the manager of the hearing. I think the curly guy. He's talking with them about nuances, or yeah, you say nuances in English. Like, things are not black and white, and we see that all the time. And they can't, the people that sit there, they can't understand this gray scale referring to reality. For them, things are either black or white, and they think that he's fucked in the head when talking with them about, like many things not being so clear, a bit of this, a bit of that. And I think this is a real problem in our world today, and also a big problem in America. And I don't want to make anybody angry, but talking about Trump supporters, and also some, I believe in progression, but some radical progressive people also. And so, and then there's the part in which Kitty, his wife, she's sitting there at some point, and this is why she's managing to turn Rob and the other guys into some sort of a joke, and in her answers, using her answers that she's giving to Rob's questions, and this is kind of a grotesque and alarming picture of the absence of ability or capacity to understand complexity. And this reminds a lot of what is happening nowadays. I live in Israel. I've been all over the world. I've seen it in too many countries in recent years. So it's 45 minutes, and I'll finish for now. I believe there'll be 2 videos more. Thank you for watching. You can comment, you can like the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you could get something out of it. I'm Raphael Daniel, or Raphael Daniel, and thank you for being here.